We are the Beyond Buildings group for the Greening of Rubenstein class. As the Beyond Buildings group, we are responsible for looking at Rubenstein's Scope 3 emissions. According to the EPA, Scope 3 emissions are the result of activities from assets not owned or controlled by the reporting organization, meaning the emissions that aren't directly produced by the institution itself. Scope 1 and 2 emissions are emissions that come directly from the institution. These emissions are associated with things like heating and cooling, whereas Scope 3 emissions come from things like faculty, staff, and student commuting. This semester, we had 3 goals. Our first goal was to define how to identify what constitutes Scope 3 emissions, specifically for the Rubenstein School now and in the future. In the past, this class is solely focused on emissions directly coming from assets owned by Rubenstein, Scopes 1 and 2, so our first goal was to define a framework for determining Scope 3 emissions for future iterations of this class. After researching UVM and other institutions' greenhouse gas inventories, we've defined Rubenstein Scope 3 emissions as emissions resulting from assets not owned or controlled by the Rubenstein School. These emissions include Rubenstein's student, faculty, and staff commuting, directly financed air travel, study abroad air travel, solid waste disposal, wastewater, paper purchasing, transmission and distribution loss, and other.
Our second goal this semester was to determine the greenhouse gas emissions by the management of Rubenstein land. We have worked with Facilities Management Department to recognize what tools are used seasonally, and we found that machinery used is primarily from the company Greenworks. Their landscaping tools are all electric, which helps mitigate emissions. In addition, we found that many of the areas owned by Rubenstein are managed by individual contractors. The emissions by contractors are the Scope 3 emissions that we are looking at. These contractors are held to the same city standards for landscaping emissions. We are also working directly with the Office of Sustainability and Aaron Kamir, their pollinator intern, to map the lawns on campus. By doing this, we are creating a living resource that we can use to track emissions created by the grounds crew and contractors. And these emissions are tracked by area of managed space. In the future, we suggest that the university and Rubenstein look into other lawn options such as moss and clover. These are way more sustainable and provide the same aesthetics that the university strives for.
Our final goal was to define the effect of travel for field classes in the Rubenstein School. These emissions fall under Scope 3 as the majority of buses used to transport students to the field are outsourced to bus companies. In determining these emissions, we've been working with the Rubenstein School Lab Coordinator Taylor Antal. In order to calculate the carbon footprint of these outsourced buses, we've compiled data on commonly traveled sites and the fuel consumption information for the buses, and then calculated emissions from there. Rubenstein wouldn't be Rubenstein without its field labs. They provide high-value, hands-on experience for all its students. At the same time, we are trying to consider our impact on the environment by reducing greenhouse gases where we can or incorporating new strategies. This semester, our goal was simply to quantify the carbon associated with field classes. Would you believe that in the 2022 to 2023 school year alone, Rubenstein emitted nearly 16 tons of carbon just traveling to our lab classes? And since 1 ton of CO2 weighs about as much as a great white shark, that means the carbon emissions of Rubenstein lab classes weigh the same as 16 great white sharks. Wow. And with that crazy fact, this is Aiken's Scope 3 team signing off. Thanks for listening.